I still remember the night she slammed the door in my face. The cold wind hit harder than her words, but not as hard as the truth. My own daughter had just thrown me out. "Dad, it's not my problem anymore," she said, her voice sharper than a knife. I stood there, clutching my old jacket and a $10 bill she tossed at me like spare change. $10, after raising her alone for 28 years. The rain poured down, soaking my shirt, but I didn't care. What hurt most wasn't losing my home. It was losing her heart. Neighbors watched silently as I walked away from the house I built with my bare hands. My heart begged me to forgive her, but my pride whispered, "No, not this time." That night, as I slept on a park bench, I made a silent promise. She would regret every tear she made me shed. Because fathers don't seek revenge out of hatred. They seek it out of broken love. And when that love turns cold, it becomes something far more dangerous. 2 years later, she came back, crying, desperate, begging to live under my roof. And that's when she realized the man she abandoned no longer existed, was someone else now, someone she should have never crossed. This is my story, the story of a father's revenge, born from heartbreak. Before everything fell apart, my life was simple. Not perfect, but full of meaning. I wasn't rich, but I was proud of what these two hands could build. As a mechanic, I spent my days fixing engines and my nights fixing toys for my little girl, Lily. After my wife passed when Lily was 10, I promised myself I'd never let her feel alone. I learned to braid hair, pack school lunches, and sew torn dresses, all things her mother used to do. There were nights when I'd work late, my fingers cracked and greasy, just to afford her birthday cake. And when she'd hug me and whisper, "You're the best dad in the world," it made every sleepless night worth it. We didn't have much, an old house, a creaky porch, and a second-hand TV, but we had laughter. On Sundays, we'd sit outside with lemonade, watching fireflies while she told me about her dreams. She wanted to be a teacher. "To help kids like you helped me," she said. I remember smiling, thinking I'd done something right in this world. I sold my car when she got accepted into college, just to cover her first semester. I told everyone at the garage that I was investing in my future. What I didn't say was that I was eating canned soup so she could eat properly in her dorm. When she got married, I gave her the house deed, my one true possession, as a wedding gift. It wasn't just a house, it was the heart of every memory we'd ever made. I thought I was securing her happiness, ensuring she'd always have a home, even after I was gone. And for a while, things were good. She'd visit on weekends, bring groceries, and hug me like the little girl she once was. She'd say, "Dad, you've done enough. Let me take care of you now." I didn't need much, just her time, her voice, her company. But as years went by, I noticed her smiles grew shorter, her visits rarer. Calls stopped. Messages went unanswered. Still, I excused it. I told myself she was busy, that life happens, but deep down, I knew something was changing. Something colder was taking root in her heart. I had spent my life giving her everything I could. Love, shelter, dreams, and a future. And in return, all I ever wanted was a little space in her world. I didn't know then that the world I'd built for her would one day throw me out completely. The day it happened is carved into my bones. I woke up to the smell of coffee, her coffee, and thought it was another ordinary morning. When I shuffled into the kitchen, Lily and her husband sat across from each other, quiet and strange. "Morning, Dad," she said, but there was no warmth behind the words. I smiled the way I always did and asked if she needed anything. Her husband looked at me like I'd interrupted a private conversation. "Sit," Lily said curtly. Folding her arms, my smile faltered. Something in the room had a cold edge I hadn't felt before. "Dad," she began, and every syllable sounded practiced. "We've been talking, and, well, we think it's best if you find somewhere else to live." For a moment, the words didn't mean anything. My ears missed the weight of them. "Find somewhere else?" I echoed, because I refused to let that sentence land. Her husband answered for her, with a slow, smug drawl. "You're a pensioner. You slow us down. You're expensive." I felt the room tilt. The kitchen chair scraped as I stood, stupidly asking, "Are you serious?" Lily's face hardened. "Yes. We can't keep supporting someone who doesn't pull their weight." My heart hammered like metal on metal. "I raised you. I gave you this house." "We know, Dad," she said, as if reciting lines from a script. "And we're grateful. But things change." Grateful. The word landed like a slap. I could feel my throat closing. Then she reached into her purse and produced a crumpled $10 bill. She tossed it toward me. It fluttered and landed on the floor like a mocking coin. "For the bus," she said, eyes not meeting mine. "Good luck," the room spun. Cold, thin laughter, hers, echoed in my ears. Humiliation rose like bile in my throat. I bent to pick up the bill, feeling every stare from neighbors through the thin walls. "Take it," she said. "It's what you'll need." Sadness hit first, a heavy, soft blanket that smothered my voice. I wanted to cry, to beg, to explain. Disbelief followed. How could she reduce me to this? The man who fixed her bicycle, who sewed rips in her dresses, who slept with her hand in mine when storms came. I managed to say, "Lily, please, just tell me why," she shrugged. "You don't get it, Dad. You're holding us back." Anger flared hot and bright afterward. A match struck in my chest. Not loud at first, small, simmering, but it grew. "After everything?" I asked, my voice raw. "After nights without sleep? After selling my truck for your wedding?" Her husband rolled his eyes. "We told you, old man. We can't afford to drown in the past." They used my sacrifices as an accusation. That cut deeper than any blade. When I reached for my late wife's photograph on the mantel, her husband stepped between me and that memory as if to say it meant nothing now, packed my small bag with trembling hands. The same hands that had lifted her onto counters and carried her through. Fevers. Neighbors watched from the sidewalk as I left, their pity like a spotlight of shame. At the door, Lily didn't look back. She shut it softly, definitively, as if closing a chapter she'd outgrown. As the door clicked, disbelief turned into a quiet, seething fury. I walked away with $10 in my pocket and a soul that felt emptied by greed and disrespect. And somewhere between the street lamps and the bus stop, grief hardened into something colder, a resolve that I would not be erased so easily. For months after that night, I drifted like a ghost through a life I no longer recognized. I slept on benches, in shelters, sometimes in the back of the repair shop where I found part-time work. Each night, the same memory replayed, her voice, flat and cold. "You're holding us back." I'd wake up drenched in sweat, gripping that wrinkled $10 bill like it could somehow undo the past. There were days I wanted to forgive her. Days I convinced myself it was my fault. Maybe I'd loved her too much. Maybe I'd made her soft. But every time I saw a father walking hand in hand with his daughter, something inside me cracked a little more. Winter came, and with it, the bitter kind of loneliness that bites through layers of clothing. I'd sit outside the shelter, watching families through lit windows, laughter, dinners, warmth. All I had was a cup of watery soup and a bed that smelled like bleach. Still, I told myself, at least she's safe. At least she's happy. That thought kept me alive. Until the night I saw her again. It was pure accident. I was fixing a car near a diner when she walked out. Expensive coat, diamond earrings, head high. Her husband held the door for her, then laughed loudly when she complained about the price of their meal. They passed by me without a flicker of recognition. Just a glance, quick and dismissive, the way you look at a stranger you'll never see again. That was the moment my heart turned to stone. I wasn't a father in her story anymore. I was just a chapter she'd erased. That night, I went back to my tiny rented room and stared at my reflection in the cracked mirror. The man looking back wasn't broken. Not anymore. He was quiet, deliberate, dangerous, I whispered to him. "You've had enough." The words came slow at first, like testing an old engine after years of silence. But as they left my mouth, they grew louder, stronger, until I was saying it over and over. Enough, enough, enough tears, enough humiliation, enough pretending time would fix what betrayal destroyed. I remembered every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every dream I had handed her wrapped in trust, and how she crushed it without looking back. I could forgive a mistake, but not cruelty, not willful cruelty. And as I sat there in the half-light, I realized something. Revenge wasn't about hate. It was about balance. She had tipped the scales with greed and pride, and I would set them right again. But I wouldn't shout. I wouldn't storm back into her life. No, my revenge would come quietly, like winter frost, slow, unseen, and impossible to stop once it began. That night, as I folded the $10 bill and placed it carefully in my wallet, I made a vow. "I gave you life, Lily," I whispered, "and now I'll teach you what life really costs." The man who left that room wasn't the same man she'd thrown out. He wasn't just a father anymore. He was a storm waiting for the right moment to break, and when it did, she'd know what it meant to lose everything she once took for. Granted, I didn't storm back into her life the way movies show. I moved like a shadow, small and patient. First, I learned to listen in ways I never had. To the creak of steps, to the patterns of bills, to the soft cadence of gossip at the garage. I started keeping a notebook. Names, dates, little details I'd overheard. Lily missed a tax deadline in May. Her husband stopped answering calls in August. An auction was rumored for the property in November. People think revenge is heat. It's not. It's homework. So I did mine. I visited the library and read old municipal records until my eyes watered. I asked questions at the city office, polite and curious. The clerk thought I was an old man with idle time. Perfect. I reconnected with a lawyer I'd known for years, a man who'd once helped me draft that deed I'd given her. He didn't ask why I cared so much. He only said, "There are ways the law protects those who think ahead." I started saving every spare dollar from the repair jobs. I fixed cars by day and tightened my budget by night. Cans of beans replaced dinners out. Pride was expensive. Patience was cheap. In the evenings, I sat with a cup of tea and plotted scenarios. Best case, worst case, plausible case. I learned about tax lines, auction notices, and redemption periods. I didn't need to know everything, only what would matter when the time came. I made quiet allies. Rosa from the shelter who knew the auctioneer's schedule. Mark, an old colleague at City Hall who would slip me a copy of public notices. And Mrs. Chen, who ran the corner store and watched the comings and goings at Lily's house. None of them asked for much. Sometimes I fixed a leak. Sometimes I paid for a week of groceries. I opened a small business account under my name. Nothing flashy, just enough to make bids look legitimate, and to keep my money separate from the life I'd lost. People assume revenge needs fireworks. Mine needed receipts, signatures, and timing. I practiced patience, the way I'd once practiced patience while teaching Lily to ride a bike. When a notice about unpaid property taxes appeared in the public ledger, I didn't leap. I smiled and circled the date in red. I called my lawyer. We whispered plans over coffee like conspirators in plain sight. I bought the debt quietly, not out of greed, but to gain the legal standing I needed. It felt strange, buying a problem I'd once solved with love. I didn't broadcast my moves. I watched from the shadows as notices were mailed, as deadlines came and went, as small crises began to crack the facade Lily had built. I practiced restraint. Twice I almost walked up to the house and knocked, but I reminded myself a single knock would ruin everything. I learned how auctions worked, who watched, who bluffed, who left at the last second. I attended a few as a bystander, pretending to be an old man fascinated by the noise. When the day came, I had more than money. I had evidence, a plan, and the silence of someone who'd been wronged and had decided to be clever about it. Even then, I left parts of the plan locked away. I told myself the less she suspected, the more potent the lesson would be. There were nights I almost faltered, when loneliness gnawed at the edges of my will. That's when I visited the little things we'd shared, the porch swing, the garden patch, and felt it fuel me instead. I kept a small list of contingencies. What to do if she fought the process? What to do if the house sold to a stranger? What to do if guilt softened me? I never crossed lines. I walked legal paths until they led me where I needed to be. People will ask later if I felt guilty. Sometimes, in the quietest moments, I did. But guilt is different from justice. I wanted balance, not the annihilation of a life. So I waited. And that waiting was its own kind of armor. It taught me timing, humility, and how to turn memory into leverage without losing my soul. Now, as I stand in the doorway of the house I once gave away, there's still a part of the plan I haven't told you. The one that would make her look at me and suddenly understand the price of what she threw away. I'm not ready to reveal that last piece just yet. Some things should unfold in front of them, not be spoken about in the dark. But I'll tell you this. When the final move comes, it won't be loud. It will be inevitable. And when it happens, she will know, with the cold clarity of daylight, exactly who stood up after she pushed him down. When the day finally arrived, I moved with the quiet pace of someone who has waited for years. The courthouse steps smelled like old paper and new beginnings as the auction began. People shouted numbers, slid papers, waved arms, a loud circus for something that once held our family's life. I sat near the back, my face a calm mask. My lawyer passed me a folded note. Now, I stepped forward and bid, not with anger, but with the steady hand of a man who had counted every dollar twice. The hammer fell, and for the first time since the deed left my hands, the house was legally mine again. I didn't dance. I didn't gloat. I simply walked across town and let myself in the side gate like a man reclaiming a lost coat. The windows were dusty. The curtains hung limp with neglect, but the kitchen still smelled faintly of coffee she used to make. I changed the locks that afternoon, quietly, legally, with paperwork filed so no one could claim I'd stolen anything. Then I did the thing she never expected. I left a small note on the door for her. If you want in, knock like a tenant. She didn't knock. She barged in 2 days later, suitcase in hand and eyes wide with panic. Dad, please! I have nowhere left to go. Her voice cracked like old paint. I let her in, but on my terms. I made her sign a simple lease. Nothing fancy, just a piece of paper that reminded her this was not charity. She sputtered at first, then accepted, pride shredded. That was my first twist. The man she'd kicked out was now the landlord who could set conditions. But I wasn't finished. I wanted the people who had stood by and cheered her cruelty to see the truth. I called an old friend at the community center and arranged a small meeting. a neighborhood conversation about responsibility. I told him. Neighbors filled the chairs, curious about the man who'd reappeared in his old house. I spoke calmly about dignity and debt. Then I let the evidence speak. I handed out copies of invoices, unpaid tax notices, and bank statements that showed how her husband had siphoned funds and stopped paying the property taxes. Gasps went around the room. Faces I'd known for decades looked at them like they'd been holding a hidden truth in their pockets. Word travels faster than fire in a dry summer. Within days, the whole block knew the story of missed payments and the man who had been forced to sleep on benches. Her husband tried to deflect, but a creditor's call in the middle of a neighborhood potluck exposed him further. A public, awful, impossible to ignore moment. He left that night, not with swagger, but with the hollowed look of a man who'd gambled his life away. That was twist number 2. I contacted the bank and the tax office, not to punish illegally, but to ensure everything was transparent and irrefutable. Paper trails don't lie. When creditors began sending letters and the husband's other delinquencies surfaced, the community stopped whispering and started asking hard questions. Lily watched as the life she thought secure began to unravel, piece by piece, under the weight of paperwork and truth. One morning, she found photos on the kitchen table, our old family albums placed beside current bills, a silent comparison she could not ignore. She confronted me, eyes burning. "Why humiliate me?" she demanded. I answered simply, "I didn't humiliate you." The truth did. The final twist came when an old co-worker of hers, who'd benefited from her husband's lies, admitted to the police that he'd been falsifying receipts for the couple to hide gambling losses. It wasn't my doing. The law took its course once the evidence was visible, but I'd set the stage by collecting the facts, by refusing to let things remain hidden. The husband faced consequences for debts and fraud. He moved out of town to avoid the shame, and then letters followed him like ghostly echoes. Lily, stripped of the protective veil, had to face neighbors she'd offended, employers who questioned her references, and the shame of a life built on borrowed security. I never sought to destroy her, only to reveal what she and those around her had chosen to ignore. When she finally knelt before me one night in the kitchen and begged for forgiveness, it wasn't the kneel that won me. It was the long silence that followed. She had lost comfort, status, and the naive conviction that love would always shield her from consequence. I watched her rebuild, slow, clumsy, honest. She took a job, paid rent, and learned the humbling arithmetic of living on her own again. That satisfaction, seeing her learn the cost of what she threw away, was the deepest part of my revenge. It wasn't fury that filled me at the end. It was a hard, quiet justice that left room for both consequence and eventual mercy. The house was quiet again, but this time it felt different. Not empty, not haunted, just still. The echoes of shouting and betrayal had been replaced by the soft rhythm of real effort. Lily sweeping the porch, cooking simple meals, paying her share of the bills. Sometimes I'd watch her from the window, her hair tied back like when she was a child, and I'd wonder, was this punishment or redemption? The day she handed me the rent in exact cash, eyes steady, no tears, I realized my revenge had already transformed into something else. I had expected triumph, but what came was something quieter. Peace. Maybe. One evening she found me sitting by the old oak tree in the yard, the same spot where she once learned to ride her bike. She brought me a cup of tea, warm and steady, and sat beside me in silence. For a long time, we didn't speak. The only sound was the wind through the leaves. Finally, she said, "I don't deserve your kindness." I sipped the tea and answered, "It's not kindness, Lily. its consequence. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She just nodded, and that small gesture carried more weight than any apology could. In that moment, I saw not my betrayer, but my daughter, stripped of pride, of excuses, of everything false. She was human again, flawed, fragile, and real. That night, before I went to bed, I found an envelope on my table. Inside were $10 and a handwritten note. For the bus fare you never used. My throat tightened. I sat there for a long time, tracing her handwriting with my fingers. That crumpled bill, once a symbol of rejection, had become a symbol of understanding. I didn't forgive her right away. Forgiveness isn't a switch. It's a slow, uneven climb. But the bitterness began to fade, replaced by something gentler, empathy, maybe even hope. She started volunteering at the local shelter, the same one that had once taken me in when she told me that she'd met people there who just need one more chance. I saw the change in her heart. I realized then that revenge, when tempered by patience, can evolve into redemption, not just for the victim, but for the one who caused the pain. Now, years later, we sit together on that porch again. The same sunsets, the same laughter, but wiser hearts. Sometimes she still glances at me with guilt in her eyes, and I tell her gently, the past is a lesson, not a prison. I keep that old $10 bill framed above the fireplace, not as a reminder of betrayal, but as proof that even broken things can have meaning again. Because the truth is, revenge doesn't heal you, understanding does, and sometimes the greatest revenge isn't making someone suffer, it's watching them grow, knowing you were strong enough to let them try again. Moral: no pain lasts forever if you learn from it. No betrayal wins if you rise above it. And sometimes, the sweetest revenge is simply living well and letting time show who truly learned the lesson.